My first Revoltech Amazing Yamaguchi Spider-Man. Will it be able to take me for a ride? Let's see exactly how this goes, since this is going to be my first Revoltech review on the channel. A brand that, despite looking very stylized and albeit very cool with certain characters, Spider-Man was always the one that to me just looked a little too stylized, a little too exaggerated. But I finally pulled the trigger on this 2.0 revision of the Amazing Spider-Man, sculpted by Amazing Yamaguchi, which is very fun to say. Ported over from Revoltech. And so this is my first foray into the brand because, like I said, I was always kind of apprehensive because of the stylization of their characters. They're very exaggerated, proportions are not exactly going to be very accurate, very cohesive with each other, and you can kind of already see that happening a little bit with Spider-Man, especially since Spider-Man has such a unique physique and kind of build to his overall design that when something just goes a little bit too far to the left, to the right, or to the bottom, I should say in this case, then it just kind of sticks out to me like a sore thumb. And that's why I was always kind of holding myself from clicking on add to cart when it came to an Amazing Yamaguchi figure. But seeing that this is going to be technically a revision of a prior existing one that kind of did look just a little off as far as like sculpting of the face, the lenses, and I'm referring to the original 1.0. There was something about it that I'm just like, I'm gonna hold off for now. So I thought to myself, well, now in 2024, don't knock it until I tried it. And I tried it, and I gotta be honest, it's warmed up to me. That's not to say that Revoltech is absolved from any criticisms, because you can see here right off the bat that one of them is going to be their design choice for the 2.0. Something that I knew, something told me, wait a minute, this was not the suit that was part of the 1.0, and I was more or less right. The 1.0 had a much more classic, straightforward, authentic Spider-Man look to the suit. You had a very generic spider symbol on the front and the back, traditional hues for the red and blue. The overall design just screamed classic Spider-Man lifted from the 1960s comics. This version, not so much. I don't know the specific name for it, but I do know that this is a much more armorized, very neo-futuristic look to Spidey, where it's much more chrome infused with the color hues, specifically the blue. You can see how reflective it is, the paneling for the red, the overall sheen on the red, and then that spider symbol on the front that's, like I said, very stylized, but it's got that white outer glow outline around it. And I do remember distinctly that this suit was available in Insomniac's 2018 Spider-Man game, which I think they did carry it over on Spider-Man 2. I might be wrong about that, but I do know for certain it showed up in the 2018 game. And so they decided to opt for that specific suit, that much more futuristic looking suit, for this version of the 2.0. And I'm not the biggest fan of it. I don't hate it too much, and if anything, I would say that this is probably a suit that favors Revoltech because of their stylized demeanor when it comes to sculpting out their figures. But at the same time, I really do wish that they would have just carried on over the original classic suit, because I'm a sucker for that one. Whereas this, yeah, you have the much more reflective sheen, like I said, the paneling, and this kind of does favor the musculature. It does a good job of emphasizing the little, divots and kind of curvatures of the overall sculpting of the muscles, whether it be around the chest area, the arms. But then that also kind of brings forward the other criticism that I have, that I know it's probably going to lean more towards subjective, which is the thing that I've always kind of nicked Revoltech for, which is that very exaggerated level of proportioning. Specifically the legs. After I pulled this out of the box, I was like, Jesus Christ, this guy went a little too crazy on leg day. People, the stereotype is that people often neglect leg day because they hate doing it. And whereas here, Spidey decided to just do leg day every single time that he went to the damn gym throughout the week, and barely did anything that had to do with the arms. If anything, the arms are probably just a product of him saving innocent bystanders in New York when he's Spiding. But when he actually hits the gym, it's nothing but leg day. It's nothing. Nothing exists except leg day, because look at those goddamn thighs. Chun-Li will look at these and go, goddamn. From the front view to the side, and even from the back, where I think it looks just a little bit the most egregious, considering how flat of an ass. I'm sorry, but again, go with the cohesiveness. If he's gonna have massive legs and he's been popping those squats like crazy, then he's gotta have an ass. I'm sorry, but justice for Spidey's ass. He's gotta have the badonkadonk because it just anatomically does. I don't know what I'm saying. At least when you're looking at him from the back, you get to what, in my opinion, is probably some of my favorite design choices with the figure, which has to be the spider symbol. I actually do like the uniqueness of this specific one, more so than the one on the front. And plus, the trapezoids and the latimus dorsi sculpting actually looks just a little bit more favorable once you get to this part right here. Everything else kind of follows suit for a traditional Spidey figure, except it really does boil down to personal preference, whether or not you like the boots to be as high as they are on this body. Like I said, it's a stylistic choice. For me personally, this we lean a little bit more towards indifference. I'm kind of like, well, it is what it is. It's a stylistic where you have it shorter on the inside versus the higher up risen part of the boot right here towards the outside. It's once we get to the sculpting and the overall look of the feet that just look very, very awkward. Again, it kind of leans towards those weird proportions and design choices when it comes to this bottom part of the body that I'm like, why? But I guess you could make the argument that there is a specific answer as to why. Before we get to that though, like I said, everything just follows suit with Spidey as far as design. It's pretty much everything that you would expect from an overall Spidey suit, despite the reflection of the color hue and everything. It's pretty much traditional Spidey, so it still can live up to its name of being called a classic Spidey, specifically when you get to the head sculpt, where you have the overall sheen of the red still carried on through, but you still have an awful lot of the traditional lining for the web, the lenses, except you'll notice that if you look a little closer, the white of his lenses looks a little greenish. At first, kind of hated it. Again, going back to these design choices that I just didn't understand why they were happening. But over time, I was like, well, you know what? We always get white lenses with Spidey here. I guess it's because maybe the reflection of the futuristic look to his suit, as well as the outer glow of the spider symbol on the front, that the green in his eyes, or at least that very green, light green tint, that it almost makes his lenses look a little glow in the dark-ish looking. It kind of, like I said, started to warm up to me a little bit. For strictly shits and giggles, here we have the Mafex Classic Spidey. Now, technically speaking, this is the reissue as well. So technically speaking, further, we got 2.0s all across the board right here. This is not the original 1.0. This is the 2.0 that Revoltech decided to release. And then we have the classic 2.0, or the revision, or whatever you want to call it, re-release of the classic Spidey that doesn't have the much more reflective sheen, doesn't have the Peter head, and it has a few less accessories. But nevertheless, it's their go-to definitive classic comic book Spidey. And you can see that, yeah, we definitely, apart from the aesthetical differences with the suit that I've already kind of called out, with the much more futuristic approach to the suit, the reflective coloring, as well as the symbol on the front, outside of that, you definitely see exactly what each company is going for as far as aesthetics, as far as tone, the faithfulness or lack thereof, but almost intentionally as far as something that's a little bit more on the stylistic side versus something that is definitely what you'd expect out of a Spidey figure from a higher, I don't want to say higher class, but a much more higher tier priced figure that kind of gets a little closer to the $100 price tag. But at the same time, it's supposed to most definitively be lifted directly from those comic book panels, and now it's in your hands in three-dimensional format. That's pretty much what Mafex has always often, trying to strive for, whereas Amazing Yamaguchi, Revoltech, they kind of got their own thing going. And so this is probably the most stark imagery that you're ever going to find that is indicative of that. So despite some of these creative choices, whether you like them or not, at least it makes for an aesthetically different Spidey when you have him in a museum pose. It's once you get him out of the museum pose that then that why began to be answered for me a little. You see, as you navigate the figure a little bit more, you'll notice just how very jointy this guy is, and that's always been Revoltech's shtick, is to make sure that you got joints upon joints upon joints. Certain pieces of clothing have joints in them. I'm talking to that Batman that I am currently on the hunt for. But for now, let's make the argument in defense of Spidey's physique here as to why it is that certain parts are really bulky, really disproportionate, because this Spidey, when it comes to Amazing Yamaguchi, the museum pose is not very favorable on the overall look of the figure. But then it finally clicked with me, no pun intended there. that's not necessarily what Amazing Yamaguchi Revoltech is trying to do. They're trying to go for the much more stylized poses, the very exaggerated stuff, something that would probably make someone like Todd McFarlane a little proud. And that's because once you start to mess with the articulation is when it finally dawned on me as to what kind of demographic, what kind of people Revoltech is really kind of trying to target when it comes to their collecting base, as far as these very stylistically designed and somewhat disproportionate figures. It even starts with the head itself. At the top, you have a ball joint that definitely rotates 360 and is able to tilt very generously, almost a full 180 degrees upwards, as well as being able to slightly incline downwards, although it stops right about right there. But I'm trying to stop myself because I don't want to spoil it too soon. A little bit of tilting side to side, but a little restricted in that regard. But the reason for why that is because we then get what is probably one of my favorite joints of the overall figure. At the base of the or at least the base of the shoulders, bottom of the neck, you have this piece that is technically articulated at the shoulders that is able to give you that full extremities of inclination towards the insides to allow the head to move down all the way across like so, as well as being able to stretch towards the back even further. Now, of course, that comes at the cost of a slight little gap appearing there around the chest area. But once you're able to overlook that, yeah, that bottom joint allows much more flexibility overall. And you can see right there just how flexible and fluid it makes the overall top part of the head, that to the point where you can get so many poses happening when you have his eyes kind of meeting certain gazes to be able to like shoot webs or kind of make it look like he's wall crawling, etc. So that is pretty awesome. It gets even better because then you get to the shoulders where things go just a little ham, just straight out ham. You'll notice that, yeah, the ball joints are most definitely exposed. The Revoltech is not ashamed to just full-on show off the little ball joint here around the shoulder area that's cut out via this piece of plastic that's just completely allowing it to be exposed. But there's a reason for that. There's at least reason and merit. And that's because rotation is a little on the slanted side. It does feel a little awkward because you're not just moving the joint, you're moving pretty much the two rods that connect the arm and the shoulder together via the rod that's sticking into the body and the one that's sticking into the arm. So full rotation vertically 360 is doable, but you kind of have to futz and move the arm to kind of work its magic around said joint. But the reason for why that is because when you get to extension, holy shit, look at this. Full movement, almost a full 180 degree movement and extension and lift towards the top of the sky like so. Look at this. And when the figure's able to do that, I gotta be honest, I feel like the possibilities then become a little endless. Now, there is a little bit of a disclaimer, and that is that when you start to move the arms, oh, you can actually kind of see it a little bit on the right one here. When you start extending the arm like so, because of the rods that are sticking into the body they're snug and tight in place, but they're not actually affixed to the body. So if you start doing a little bit too much extension, poof, there you go. Comes off. And this is for both arms. Now, it's not that loose. Like I said, I actually have to give it a little bit of friction, a little bit of pull to make that happen. But technically speaking, they're not glued or actually snapped into place. So do be careful when kind of having all of these things assembled. And that goes for multiple joints throughout the body. You might actually see a few more limbs come apart a little bit when messing with the articulation with Spidey here. To somewhat help you with that will be these panels that are inside of the body, kind of getting close a little bit to the chest. You'll notice that you actually have these panels that allow a little bit of butterfly movement, not so much going towards the front. It can kind of fidget a little bit towards the front, but they're mainly there to favor movement, butterfly movement towards the back. So you can see more so on the right here that this panel's kind of flipping and flabbing and kind of switching towards the back, which does allow a little bit of a gap to expose itself right about right there. But when you start to, like I said, work that and kind of strategize with the ball joint here at the top of the shoulder, then you can get some really flexible movement happening with the overall shoulder, to the point where I almost feel like because of the swiveling that you can still also do with this top ball joint right here, kind of renders the bicep swivel a little redundant. Even though it's technically still there and you can still rotate it all the way around, even though mine's just a little on the tight side, it can kind of squeak a little bit. It is still found there, but considering that this is able to swivel as well, It's like, okay, well, thank you. I appreciate it. But it kind of, like I said, there's a little bit of redundancy happening right about right here. Then you get another ball joint with those two rods similar to that of the shoulder at the elbows that allow the elbows to fully bend almost all the way up like so at 2 points. However, a couple of times, didn't really happen too much right there, but it has happened in the past, similar to how this arm kind of came off the socket and the overall arm just kind of came off. It has happened a couple of times where the forearm came off this piece because, again, it's snug and tight in there, but it's not actually glued or affixed to this overall piece, so do be careful. Then you get the ball joints at the wrist that are fully able to rotate 360 as well as bend inwards and outwards, as well as some really good torso movement on the mid-torso cut, full rotation 360 degrees, as well as being able to crunch very generously inwards and extend towards the back, though, again, more exposure of a gap right there in the middle, as well as, oh my god, look at that crunching from side to side. So it's very, very favorable on the mid-torso, but if you want to go a little further, of course, you have a little bit more wiggle room with the waist joint that is able to crunch almost all the way inwards into himself like so. That's probably the furthest that I've ever been able to do with any spider figure overall. A little limited on the extension towards the back on the waist, but of course you can kind of get a little further with the mid-torso and some slight crunching side to side on the waist as well. It can technically rotate 360 degrees on the waist as well. So torsos is definitely where it's at, and there's definitely the indication there that Revoltech wanted to make sure that you get an awful lot of waist movement because of those poses that they want you to put this Spidey in. And nothing makes that more clear than the legs, starting with the top leg joint right here that can definitely move forward about that far and then extend towards the back a little bit before the ass sculpt, despite how flat it is, kind of getting in the way right about right there. Extension towards the sides is also a little bit on the limited side, but here's the thing. Here's where the argument comes in. You can kind of futz and nudge it a little bit to where once you start to kind of get the shape of this top piece kind of sliding towards the back like so, then you can get some proper flat 180 degree extension. You just get this awkwardness of the piece because of the way that it's sculpted. And yeah, there's a part of me that kind of wish that they would have gone with a design that's a bit more universal instead of being slanted like this, because like I said, that's where the plastic kind of comes in the way like that. But then when you slide it inwards, then you can kind of make some things happening as far as proper extension. But you'll notice that throughout that entire time, this swivel divide right here with an awkward paneling that's kind of sticking out right there is sliding in a different direction. It is able to slide and kind of rotate and swivel 360 degrees, but like I said, it's at a diagonal cut that it often causes the leg to do that. Yeah, you see that right there? So that's where things get just a little tiffy as far as movement in certain directions that you don't want it to go and some awkward placement. So yeah, it's just a matter of trial and error to get this thing in a variety of poses that actually looks a little cool. But at least to kind of make things look just a little bit more natural, at least in action to the point where it looks much more natural in that action, is going to be the knee joints, where you do have two knee joints that are fully able to bend almost all the way up, though at an angle because of the way that they're sculpted and designed. So if you're thinking, oh, it's not bending straight, it's not supposed to. You bend it like this, it's just a little skew into the inwards part of the body, like you see before you right about right there. That's pretty much how it's overall designed. So just know that that is intentional. It's not like, oh, it's bow-legged. My finger's bow-legged. No, that's actually exactly how they designed it for it to be. And then it gets even crazier, because now you have, in my opinion, one of the first things I've ever kind of had to deal with, a shin swivel. I've had thigh swivels. We have shin swivels, I'm sorry. Yeah, right below where the boot kind of begins and ends right here towards the top where it's slanted, you have a swivel for the shin, the bottom part of the leg, almost meeting up with the foot, that is technically able to swivel. Not a full 360 because of the way that it's designed. You see right here that it's designed, like I said, in a very slanted kind of way to where you're able to swivel it a little bit towards the back and a little inwards, but it kind of stops right about right there because of the way that this lower leg is designed and sculpted versus the kind of, like I said, the very slanted form of cone shape that the bottom leg is designed like. So you can see right there, it's just a little funky. It's a little weird. It can even nudge and kind of bend right about right there. So yeah, you can also bend it. It's not just a swivel, but it's actual peg that can bend inwards and outwards slightly like so. So yeah, you have quite a multitude of articulation happening right there. And that's because that's where they want you to get very aerodynamic and posable with the legs. That's why you got the exaggerated nature of the thighs and the overall proportioning. Now, that's all nice and dandy, but once you get to the ankles and the feet, that's where I'm like, yeah, but you could have fixed this, all right? You have a ball joint at the ankle that is pretty decent. You can pivot the foot downwards like so, bend it upwards like so, and fully rotate it 360 degrees, except it is a little difficult to manage only because of the way that this kind of cuff around the ankle is sculpted. You have the pieces that are a little bit more elongated on the outside and on the inside versus the way that it is on the top, on the front and on the back. So you do still have to navigate around that, but you are still allowed to be able to pivot the ankle inwards and outwards. You're definitely going to need that function because the toes are really weird. I'm sorry. They're just so bewildering. You're definitely able to bend the toesies upwards a good amount of degrees upwards like so, but holy shit, this is a foot cramp. This is painful. Trust me, I've had to deal with these a number of times in the morning. This right here, why? Just have it stop, like right about right there. Why does this happen? And more often than not, I end up nudging the toes in a way when I'm kind of like trying to pose the feet or the legs or do something with them. And when I'm done, I look at the feet and I'm like, oh Christ, I don't know. But once you get these poses happening and you stop looking at the individual joints by themselves and actually start to have them work with each other, that's when a little bit of magic can actually happen. Because immediately while pulling him out of the box, I was like, I don't know how I feel about this design. But once I started to do things like this, like that, I was like, wait a minute. And I'm like, can I bend the leg oh yes I can. Can I flatten the foot too? Oh yes I can, because of the way that the shin and this cone right here is designed. I can actually put him in a very squattable position that makes him look, like I said, very dynamic, look ready to fight. And then it finally dawned on me, something that's actually a little bit on the topical side right now, considering that they're planning on bringing the series back. You know what this Spidey reminds me of when I put him in certain poses like this, where he's very squatted, very stylized, very ready for action like this, and he's got, like I said, very exaggerated dynamic poses with the arm pulled all the way back right here, and you have this kind of stretched out. You have him crunching very low to the ground like so. This reminds me an awful lot, like if I want to, make some kind of fan fiction in my head, this is the Marvel vs. Capcom Spidey. Not so much classic Amazing Yamaguchi Spidey. And once I start to mentally train myself to kind of have that be the Spidey that I'm actually owning a figure of and reviewing a figure of right now, it really starts to, warm up to me. It really starts to grow on me how much of Amazing Yamaguchi's design choices favor the articulation, and makes me realize that that's what they were opting for. Not so much something that's supposed to be realistic or very accurate, which was an excellent strategy to have, considering that once we get to accessories and other little goodies kind of tossed in, it does become a little bare bones. Naturally, any Spidey figure with over $100 price tag is going to include a set of hands. They decided to plug them into this rack that, in my opinion, has grown on me. In fact, I kind of wish more mainline companies like Mayfix Figuarts would start to use this kind of rack design to hold all the hands together, because this is incredibly convenient. The next one will probably be Mayfix for the little hooks that hold each pair together, but you still have to deal with the individual pairs, whereas here, it's all in one place. So it looks a little nightmarish, but I really do dig the functionality and the convenience of having a rack like this. And the hands themselves are pretty standard for Spidey. Of course, he's got the fisted hands on him, and then in the rack, waiting for you are going to be the stretched out casual hands, the stretched out, reaching out, kind of leaping hands, gripping hands, kind of clenched somewhat. Of course, wall crawling hands with a much more stretched out, dynamic, but still kind of individually finger crunching look. You guys know what I'm talking about. And of course, the web shooting hands. The web shooting hands in particular do have holes etched out in them. That way you can use them with these two web accessories, or at least these two pairs. Two of them are, of course, web strands that look like they're being shot out, whereas the other two are kind of like in this spray kind of design, which Overall, the build quality of the web strands themselves, as well as the actual texturing and the little design choices with the webbing on the sprayed one or the actual tendrils around the shooting one, specifically with the way that it kind of fades into white towards the coil here on the front, is pretty cool. Except you'll notice that, yeah, they opted to go for that green kind of aesthetic similar to that of his eyes, therefore making it a stylistic choice that the green in his eyes is not, you know, a QC problem. It's not an error. This is exactly what Amazing Yamaguchi opted to do, which is to go for a green futuristic aesthetic. After a while, it has grown on me, but it's not necessarily the design choice I opt in for my classic Spidey. But after a while, like I said, I've gotten so tired of the traditional Mafex accessories or even the figure arts or hell, Marvel Legends, where it's just white, translucent white, or a solid white over and over and over and over. And so this is a little bit change of pace, and like I said, after a while, it's kind of grown on me. And both of these accessories can slide into either of his hands to make him look like he's either shooting a single strand that he's going to be swinging from, or like this spray kind of effect to make it look like he's catching bad guys. The only downside, though, is that I do wish that they would have thrown in a web strand that it feels like he's holding. But granted, they didn't throw in any holding hands, no actual like cylindrical holding hands to make it look like he's like mid-swing. So kind of wish that they either opted for a strand or, along with the strand, an extra pair to kind of give him that look. And yes, I do know that technically speaking, the fisted hands have little holes etched into them, but they don't come out from the other end. So they're very easy to miss, and on top of that, you don't necessarily have a dedicated web strand still, one that looks like it goes on for indefinite or it's attached to a building. You still have to utilize the shooting web strands, so there's still a part of me that wishes that there would have been some dedicated accessories to this imagery. What we are going to tackle are the web wings, which is why that becomes a little bit of a puzzling kind of situation, that you opted not to do a web swing strand or web swinging hands, but you did include the web wings. A very contested design choice for any version of Spidey. One that I personally never really liked. I'll confess, I actually confessed it a number of times in various other figure reviews for Spidey. I don't like the web wings. Ever since the 1960s, never really dug this design choice. Now, granted, they did carry on over that greenish kind of glow-in-the-dark motif, but still, I'm like, could do without these. They fit into his latimus dorsi muscles here towards the back. You'll notice that he's got, technically speaking, 3 holes, but you got the 2 small ones on one side, on one left, one right, and that's where the web wings fit in. And each of the wings have these little grooves that perfectly fit into his musculature. Except, like I said, design-wise, I'm kind of like, whatever's about it. They fit perfectly in place, but the only way that they look natural to the body is when you have the arms flush with the top part of the wing. When you're not doing that, they're going to look a little awkward. They look like they're sticking out of his back. It's almost like he's mutating into Man-Spider, like that one traumatizing animated series episode. So I opt to not really do anything with the web wings, but they are included nonetheless if you are, in fact, a fan of them. What is also included are 3 extra pair of eyes, and the 3 of them have that green aesthetic once again for the lenses. You have a leering one, you have a very surprised open one, and then you have a very kawaii looking one, like a very cutesy, like, oh, he's grinning or he's smiling kind of design. So they're very, very fun and very interesting to swap. Except this leads me to probably my only other big frustration with the figure. I managed to deal with it during the articulation, but something about this right lens, for either of the lenses, I don't know if it's maybe they etched out the hole inside of his head a little bit too wide, but this lens comes off way too easily. In fact, let me see if I can get it to happen right now. Yeah, now that I'm trying to demonstrate it's not happening, of course. That's generally how it happens, but yeah. This lens always comes off whenever there you go. I'm just moving the head and it instantly comes off. It's always just that one. So could be an isolated incident, but I did get a very, very loose right lens for the default one. Hopefully it's not persistent throughout all the lenses, but yeah, that's something that I really wish that they could have fine-tuned just a little bit. But like I said, it just demonstrates that you are able to swap out the lenses for different expressions, and therefore that combined with the articulation, different poses. And if by some chance some of those poses do require some kind of aerodynamicy, Revoltech does throw in a translucent base with an arm, And it's cool to see that, and I've seen other companies do this, but I do wish that we would see it a little bit more frequently, is the perforations on the base so that you're able to technically swap out and move the arm in different locales of the base itself. So that's a pretty nice little touch. On top of that, of course, you also get the tool to be able to pop out and swap the eye lenses right there in a translucent plastic. So do be careful not to toss out your bag like I almost did, because I didn't really notice it considering that it blended with the rest of the base. And also a swappable piece for the claw so that you're able to kind of just simply put this piece on to fit into that much larger hole on the back in case you don't want to use the claw and you instead just want to put that on the back and have it use as, basically use the base as a form of assist to get him to stand upright without ever actually holding onto him. And if you want to take it a step further, they threw in this magnetized adapter, if you want to call it. Basically, you remove the arm, you plug it into this magnetized adapter, and that way you're able to put him up on a magnetized surface without ever having to resolve to what Mafex does with the arms and the hands and the feet. But just like those magnets in Mafex figures, I don't know what it is, but it just seems like I have the worst luck with magnets because this one doesn't really want to stick to too many surfaces either. I don't know if it's the weight of the figure, the way that I'm positioning it, but I've tried it here inside of the light box. I've tried it on a leg on my desktop where I have my computer. It just does not want to actually hold on to the figure and keep it in place. It almost seems like it wants to, a lot stronger than the feet and the hands that are thrown in with Mafex figures, but still, it just doesn't manage to budge. Maybe if the arm was a little shorter, maybe if there was like a different adapter, I don't know, but still, I enjoy the concept, but the execution could have been way, way better. In all honesty, if you guys have any tips or tricks on how to get this thing to work, let me know in the comments. And after taking a little bit of a step back and realizing what is included, as well as what my eyes were open to with the articulation and the stylistic choices of those joints, and kind of getting surprised by how much they kind of, dedicated to that niche portrayal of this classic, slightly futuristic looking Spidey, it's finally dawned on me exactly what Revoltech is trying to do. They're trying to go for style. They're trying to go for something that is also sometimes talked about in the film industry, where sometimes filmmakers do things that aren't necessarily realistic. They're very dreamlike, they're very exaggerated, but they are going for emotion, they're going for feel rather than accuracy. I know that that's a very weird analogy, but that's kind of what reminded me of Revoltech here, which is that, yeah, this Spidey is super exaggerated and rather disproportionate with the legs. And in any other company, I would have definitely marked some points for that. But then it dawned on me that with the articulation and the exaggerated joints that you don't necessarily or traditionally see in a Spidey figure within this price tier, that's when it dawned on me that, that's not what they're going for. They're going for something that looks like the very weird looking Spidey that you get in the Ultimate Comics. The really squatted down, very ready to fight, fighting game style of Spidey that you get from Marvel vs. Capcom. That's what we got going on with here, which is why even though I really wish we could have expected a few additional accessories, like I said, the swinging web strand along with the hands to be able to grip onto that web strand to make it look like he's mid-swing, kind of like that Todd McFarlane cover, that infamous cover that he's about to make a statue out of. Still, it's the joints and finally getting into poses that made him come alive for me, that finally opened my eyes and go, yeah, I definitely see what Revoltech is going for, and even though I'm not going to be necessarily purchasing every single one of their figures, I'm definitely going to keep my mind open to maybe bringing on board a classic Batman, maybe that amazing Yamaguchi Batman that they came out with a few years back, or should they release a 2.0 version of that one, put down a pre-order? Who knows, but right now, I am, for the most part, very satisfied with the 2.0 revision of Amazing Yamaguchi Revoltech Spidey, and therefore I'm going to be giving him a low 8 out of 10, primarily because of the slight shortage on accessories, and again, some of the disproportioning that I had to get a handle, a feel for on some of the articulations, specifically with the arms kind of coming off, the lens popping off when getting to the swapping of the expression lenses. But once I'm able to kind of jump over those hurdles, I'm overall pretty satisfied, and I definitely came around Revoltech, and I'm looking forward to seeing if maybe a 3.0 with a different suit, or maybe something in the Batman universe will then bring me on board as a very dedicated fan. In the meantime, if you guys own any Revoltech amazing Yamaguchi figures, let me know in the comments what are your guys' proudest possessions from the company. Is it a Spidey figure, a Batman figure? If you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button. If not, hit the thumbs down. And as always, stay humble. I'll see you later.